milkshakes with cranberry. Hey, hold it. Okay.
Bug, okay. Let me ask her if we're live.
Oh. So,
Thank
Au
you,
revoir.
Jace, very much.
yeah, I know. But did you see the sweet look on that big one's face? I like her face.
You can cut in front of me like that.
Needed
Stand up
water.
for you. Lauren,
Oh, hi.
how you doing?
Hey.
Hey, Lauren.
Pretty good.
How are you?
I was just thinking, I drove past your house, I was thinking, September 8th.
September
Alright.
8th, good
I
for
mean, I have to
you.
go because it's the last one, so I have to.
You have to
You
show
have
up.
to.
I missed the last couple.
Well, you better show up to this one.
Nikki just started school today, his junior year.
Wow.
He's my baby.
I
and he's
know.
Just 2 years
Junior.
ago.
I know.
And then I'm gonna be like, I don't have anything to do.
Oh, hey, sir, watch out for the camera.
Liberty, I know. Okay,
Yeah,
I'm gonna get a Caesar salad to go.
okay, so probably in 1 minute.
Sorry, Lauren, we're doing a live chat here, so,
Oh,
yeah, no, we're not on yet, but we'll be on in a second.
okay, okay.
Right, so,
Well, I'm glad you said hi to me
yeah.
before my mouth got started. Anyway.
Oh, it's okay, no, it's all right.
Taking the
It's okay, we just didn't want you to knock it over. I mean, you do whatever you want to do, just don't
I'm
knock
good,
it over.
good. I'm so glad you guys are doing that though. It's awesome. Oh, no.
All different things, so taking pictures.
Do you want any chicken or anything on it? Or?
Denver, you gonna be famous?
Okay.
I don't know
All right,
if we're
we're
going
on.
to be, we're on,
We're
okay.
on.
All right,
Okay.
so now what are we gonna do?
Okay, all right, so my name is Liberty and this is Denver Holt. We're with the Owl Research Institute and we are here to talk about the Snowy Owl Project, which Denver has been conducting in the Alaskan Arctic for 27 years. So how'd you get started working on snowy owls up there?
Oh, gosh. It was just one of those things, I was interested in owls, and a friend of mine, Derek Craighead from the Craighead, who studied grizzly bears in Yellowstone, he told me his cousin actually worked up there and studied bowhead whales. To contact him because snowy owls bred there, I contacted Craig George. Craig said, Arctic scientists are few, we would welcome you, come on up, and that was 1992, and now we're still going.
Yeah, okay. So you've been spending every single summer up near Barrow for 27 years?
Just about every summer. The study's been going 27 years,
Okay.
and I've been there just about every one of those. You know,
Okay.
last year I tore my calf muscle, and there was a time or two my mother was sick, but for the most part, 27 years. It's
Okay.
always been going, but I haven't been there exactly 27, but 25 or so.
Okay. So officially the study is called the Snowy Owl Breeding Ecology and Lemming Population Study. And so what is the aim of this research and this study in particular?
Who came up with that title? That's a
Seriously.
mouthful. The idea was to, because of my interest in owls in particular, the great white owl, the snowy owl, was to look at the snowy owl breeding ecology in relation to its primary prey, lemmings. It's always been common knowledge that snowy owls need lemmings in order to breed. And lemmings are just little small rodents, kind of look like hamsters, weigh about, 60 to 70 grams, so maybe that's 2.5 ounces or so if you're, baking. And so, so that's it. Even though they're capable of killing large prey such as ducks and even Arctic fox and geese, they really can't breed unless the populations of lemmings are very, very abundant.
So what happens in a year when they're not abundant?
When they're not abundant, either they do not breed or very few of them breed. The one unique place about Barrow is that snowy owls always occur there. In most other areas of the Arctic, snowy owls are kind of this nomadic group of animals that come and they show up if they find a lot of lemmings, and how they assess it we don't know, but if they find a lot of lemmings they stop and breed, and next year they may move on. Barrow, Alaska is very unique in that even though the lemming populations fluctuate, snowy owls are always there, but they may not always breed, or they may breed in small numbers, and only occasionally do they have really big breeding seasons.
So does this happen in any other place in the U.S.?
Not in the United States. I mean, Alaska is the primary breeding spot for snowy owls. It's the only breeding spot for snowy owls in the United States. And then Barrow is the only reliable area. From time to time, they may nest, east and west of Barrow, but still within Alaska. But for the most part, it is the only reliable place.
Okay, all right. So 27 years, since you've been going up there, what are some of the things that you've seen change?
Oh gosh, first of all, human populations. That's the big thing. The village of Barrow used to be a small Inupiat Eskimo community, and now it's kind of a large Inupiat Eskimo primarily community, but there's been an influx of many other people up there, and so it's jobs that are bringing people there. So Barrow's expanding, and you wouldn't think that a place in the vast Arctic could really expand and have an impact on snow owls, but we're seeing a little bit of that.
Okay. So then let's talk about Denver just got back from the Arctic. So we got up there in June. Matt Larson, who's another one of our researchers, went up there early June, wasn't it?
Yeah, late May, early June, yeah.
And just did kind of a scouting mission and got things organized. And he sent back pictures at that point of the tundra, which was, still completely covered in snow and ice. And he found these nests, which to me looked like buckets that were out of the ice. And completely ice walls, blue icy walls, and at the bottom of them were between 5 and 7 nests. He found 3, eggs. So I believe he found 3 nests, all of which had 5 to 7 eggs, and it was just I love those pictures.
Yeah, it was one of the coldest seasons in a long, long time up there with prolonged snow. And like I said, Matt was up there in late May, early June. I went up in mid-June, and I was hiking, and you could probably see Melissa Grew, the photographer who joined us, her photographs. And we were hiking through slush and snow, thigh deep. It was brutal. It was cold. Every morning the wind chill was in the low 20s. It was a really, really tough season on us. But as Lib said, one of the unique things we learn, and you learn all the time, and I just didn't know that snowy owls could dig through hard ice. I always knew that they could dig into the soil to, build their nests. But they dug through hard ice, and they always ended up on a mound on the tundra, which is uneven. So pretty interesting stuff that we just learned this year after 27 years.
It's uneven under the snow, but when you're looking across
it looks totally flat.
Yeah.
So how did they pick the mounds?
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay. So then let's talk about what you found when you went up there. Matt went up and did his scouting. He found 3 nests. Things looked encouraging at that point. Given what you've seen in some other years, which was no nesting at all. So
it looked encouraging. Matt thought that he saw a lot of owls, and he thought because it was so difficult and there was so much snow, that it was going to be, it was just hard to find nests. And I also at that time started getting a few emails on people saying, Denver, there's lemmings everywhere, it's going to be a big snowy owl year. Over the years, I have learned, however, that not to believe anybody. And so when people say there's a lot of lemmings, I'm encouraged, but I always wait until I evaluate it myself. And so when I got there, I saw lemmings, but immediately, I would say the first couple of days, I just didn't see, the owls are hard to find, but I didn't see the Jaegers, particularly the Palmer and Jaeger. And if Palmer and Jaegers are abundant, then lemmings are abundant as well. They're just easier to see on the snow-covered landscape than the snowy owl. Later on, the owls are easier to see when the snow melts. So I started picking up where Matt left off and scoured our 100 square mile study area. And in the end, we only found 7 nests. And so again, that tells you that it's not really a big lemming year. It's low to moderate at best. But there were a lot of owls around. So either they couldn't get the resources or the lemmings because of the snow cover, or there just wasn't enough lemmings. And so we saw pairs of birds that either didn't breed or maybe failed early on, and then we saw single males on territory, holding territories, but they didn't have females. So there was a good number of owls around indicating that there were lemmings, but not a big lemming year.
Okay. So what's the most number of nests you've located?
The most we've had, 54 nests in 1995, I believe. And the last really good breeding years were 2006, 2008, and then 2014 wasn't bad. I think we had 35 and 36 or so nests in 6 and 7, and then in 14 we had 20 or 21 nests, which wasn't bad at all. and then that's it, you know.
Mhm.
And then 18 this year, we had 7 nests, 3 failed very early on during the incubation stage, and so I was able to monitor 4 nests for the summer.
Okay, all right. So survival rates for those 4 nests?
They all fledged young. One nest was great. It had 7 eggs, 7 chicks, and I think 6 of the 7 fledged. And then the others had 6 and 7 eggs, and the other 2 and 3 fledged out of each of those. And then the last one, a very, very late nest that I didn't think had a chance, and totally surprised me. They had 4 eggs and 4 hatched. I was surprised when the first one hatched. And we don't know exactly how many fledged because they were 3 weeks to between 3 and 4 weeks behind. And so, but they left the nest. They were growing really well. So I think they had a good shot at it, but I don't know for sure how many fledged out of that nest. But at least they grew to leaving the nest.
Yeah, those were the 2 nests that certainly captured my attention, and you know, like you were reporting back on the most, the one with the 7 chicks, because it was doing so well.
Yeah.
And some of you may have seen the picture of Denver. He's got a red coat on and he's got these little snowy owl chicks all around him. It's an awesome picture. And then the other one was just such a curiosity because it was so late, and you just kept saying, I don't have high hopes, I don't have high hopes, I don't think it's gonna make it. And then it did.
Yeah, I expected it to fail. First, I expected it to abandon the nest with the eggs, and then when the first chick hatched, I thought, we'll see what happens. And then the second chick, and then the third chick, and then the fourth chick, and then pretty soon there was lemmings piled up at the nest, which again is a good sign. So I think this year at that nest, there were, at one point there were 29 lemmings piled up in the nest. We might have posted a photo of that,
Yeah, we did.
which is a really great sign. And so I was feeling more confident as the season went on. And then when it was time for me to leave, all the chicks had left the nest, I think. And so they wander, they leave the nest about 3 weeks of age, and then they continue to develop. So I think they had a pretty good shot at it. Unfortunately, we won't know for sure how many fledged on that.
Okay, all right. All right, well, let's go to some of the questions that people have written in. So the first one is in response to the photo we posted that had the chicks and, you know, wreathed in the lemmings all around it. What's the most lemmings you've ever seen around a nest,
The
by the way?
most lemmings I've seen piled up in the nest is 86.
Wow.
And I didn't take a photo, I didn't have a camera that day, but I've had photos of 50 and 60 lemmings. Or something.
Yeah, okay. And the one you sent down, you said 29?
I think it was 29. It
Okay,
was a high
all right.
count, yeah.
So this question is in response to that photo, and it says, when seeing the snowy owl eggs a while ago with the lemmings all around them, I was wondering how the eggs and owlets survive when sitting in plain view with nothing to hide them and the food all around. You know, so I think the question is, you know, how do they survive? They're out there, these white beacons, well, at least after the snow melts. Which the photo you sent, I think the snow had melted. But, and also, are all those lemmings, do they attract the prey?
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Yeah, well, first of all, the white beacons aren't evident because the only reason you're seeing is we flush the female from the nest when we're doing our work. So normally the female sits on the nest and you won't see the eggs or you won't see the chicks until they get to a certain age. As far as all the lemmings around there, would it attract predators? Yeah, you know, there's Arctic foxes out there, primarily Arctic fox. In other areas you might have to deal with wolves and wolverines, bears and things of that sort. But the owls are very, very aggressive, particularly to dogs or the canid family. So Arctic fox, if it's within several hundred yards of a nest, they'll just get up, fly after it, and attack it. And this year there was a woman jogging down the road with her dog down the road, hundreds of yards from a nest. The owl flew all the way across the tundra and attacked her dogs. And so they can be very aggressive. Not always at us, but sometimes at us. But if it's a mammal, you know, a natural mammal like an Arctic fox, they all attack them. So they'll defend the nest very, very vigorously against anything.
Okay.
So that even, you know, again, even though the prey may attract, the scent may attract predators, the owls are pretty good at driving stuff off.
Okay. So let's see. I guess just on that note of them being so aggressive, I mean, when you come to the nest and you're going to measure and weigh the chicks and get information, about the actual nest site, they're diving at you and you've been hit many, many times.
Yeah, I have been hit.
Yeah.
Maybe hundreds of times. It's an individual behavior and also a pair behavior too. So the first line of nest defense is for the female to see potential threats coming, such as researchers, and flush off the nest at hundreds of meters. That's the first line of nest defense, so you don't see the nest, because once a tundra melts, you can see the females, particularly with binoculars. And so she'll slip off the nest. Then as you approach, behaviors change. It depends on the birds. Some birds will come in and they'll bark at you, you know, in a circle. Usually it's a male behavior. He'll circle and go, ar, 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 ooh, 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 and try to gather your attention, maybe lead you away. Sometimes they'll fly on the ground. They'll fake like they have injuries. And again, trying to lead you away. And it's a male behavior, the nest defense, but females engage in it as well. There's certain behaviors that are very specific to each sex. And then finally there's the attack, which is the ultimate in nest defense, and that's usually a male trait, very rarely females, but sometimes. And they come in and whack you. So when you go to a nest, you kind of learn their behaviors, and they tend to stick to their very typical behavior, the distance at which they flush, the distraction displays that they may use, and or the attack. So this year we had one nest, and I mean, you couldn't go alone, and he just beat us up. I mean, he whacked me so many times. I'm over this, you know, getting hit. I've been over this for many, many years. And there were days I worked alone, and he just came in, he'd hit you.
Was he the male with the nest of 7 chicks?
No, the nest of 7,
okay.
they were very passive.
Really?
You know, they flew in a little bit later after the chicks nest, and they made passes, but for the most part, they would sit there and hoot and fly around and hoot or scream. Female would scream, male would hoot, and then we would do our work and leave. But this other nest, that male was brutal, absolutely brutal. And he hit us so many times, or me in particular, but then we get volunteers from the other research projects. A lot of Arctic researchers up there working on a variety of climate change projects. Everyone wants to go to the snowy owl nest. So we pick the people, and I try to get the tall people, and I make them stand there. The owls attack them while I work.
Okay, so next question. Aside from the gyrfalcon, are other raptors competing for the same food sources?
Yeah, we don't have gyrfalcon in our area.
Okay.
And so we do have peregrines, and harriers come through from time to time, shorted owls from time to time, harriers, shorted owls, and you know, we see occasionally a few other raptors, rough-legged hogs, golden eagle, bald eagle. But I would say the shorted owl would be the only other competitor on a regular basis. And this year we had a number of shorted owls show up in the spring, but eventually the snowy owls, I think, just chase them off, and then they also, you know, kill them and eat them as well. So there's not other raptor competitors there for the most part. But you can have, you know, you've got Arctic fox, which eats lemmings, as well as shorebirds or other birds, chicks and eggs. You've got least weasel, you've got short-tailed weasel, also called ermine. They're tied into lemmings. You've got Jaegers. Now, Jaegers are probably not one. The Pomeranian Jaeger would be the other real lemming competitor, and they feed on lemmings as well. So when lemmings are high, snowy owl numbers are high, and Pomeranian Jaeger numbers are high. Least weasel, most likely short-tailed weasel as well, Arctic fox as well. So there are competitors, but not other raptors for the most part.
Okay. So talk about the difference in appearance between males and females.
Well, males are just totally handsome. Males, snowy owls, it's hard to say how long it takes before they really become bright white. And they lose both, as nestlings, they look very similar. Then as young birds out of the nest, when they're developing their first plumages, their flight feathers and their body feathers, they're all heavily marked with spots and bars. Females more heavily marked than males. And then as they age, they both lose the markings, but females still retain theirs, as what I believe for camouflage reasons. And males, however, they eventually become bright white over, let's say in their 3rd year, and maybe even beyond that, before they finally start losing almost all of their spots to become this brilliant, almost fluorescent white. So the males, adult males are fluorescent white, and adult females are base white with brown bars between them. That's somewhat easy to tell the difference apart. But when they're young, it's hard to tell the difference between males and females until they reach their adult plumages.
Okay. So do you want to go into any theories about why they just stay white and?
Oh,
you know,
yeah, totally, in my opinion, it's sexual selection. And so what we've learned over the years is only bright white males get to breed. So it takes several years, deferred plumage maturity, for them to become bright white. And only bright white males, so if age is indication of that, we know that only these older males have territory. Younger males that are spotted and barred and kind of look like females, they hang out in bachelor groups and they tend not to breed, they don't hold territories. Rarely will there be a young female within there, mostly it's just young males. But when you look at the breeding season, only the males that have territories and only the males that are breeding are bright white. So our conclusion is that female snowy owls breed with older white males with resources.
Okay, so what is the incubation time of eggs?
Incubation is about 33 days, plus or minus. You know, it's not always just right on like that, but it's within that range of 33 days or so. And they generally lay their eggs every other day. So if you've got 10 eggs in a clutch and they're hatching every other day, I mean, you can have a chick that's 2 weeks old and a chick that's a day old in the nest.
Right, okay. So could climate change affect the lemming population?
Yeah, could climate change affect lemmings? There's some indication of that. There's a study out of Greenland, I believe, and they felt as lemming populations decline due to a changing climate, which kind of changed the snow. The quality and quantity of snow has changed with the changing temperatures. The whole lemming population seems to decline, and in response to that, you know, foxes, owls, jaegers, and all these obligate lemming predators are beginning to disappear. So that certainly could be the case in Barrow. We're seeing both the snowy owl and the lemming decline at a parallel rate and significant declines. Snowy owls decline a little faster than the lemmings. So right now we're trying to piece that together. We're working with the Max Planck Institute out of Germany and bringing in one of their high caliber biostatisticians and modelers to help look at the climate data from Barrow, which has a very, very great history going back to the 20s, I believe, and looking at our numbers of snowy owls, which is one of the largest data sets in the world for snowy owls and lemmings, and to see if there's some association there. And again, it doesn't mean it's a fact, but it means it's correlated, if it is at all, but it would be correlated, and might suggest that something is going on. So we're trying to look at that right now, and we have a research grant from the foundation to help pay for that analysis.
Yeah, Charlotte Martin. So then there's a follow-up question, and you know, you talk about that some species are on the decline, so they may be disappearing from that area. Are you seeing any new species in the area?
Yeah, you see new species. You know, it's interesting. This year, a lot of people are talking about seeing Arctic ground squirrels in the area, and is that a result that the permafrost is melting to a point now where, you know, they're able to dig and burrow and hibernate there. But the other side of that is I remember starting early on that we saw Arctic ground squirrels when I first started up there, and then they disappeared, and now they seem to be re-emerging. So I'm not so sure of that, but a lot of people have been suggesting this year in particular because they're seeing more Arctic ground squirrels. You know, we get a lot of just stray birds that show up, but I think that's just spring overshoot. You know, they kind of miss the mark, in the, you know, for example, the tree line, and then it turns to tundra, and then they get to the Arctic Ocean, and they all stop. So we're seeing a lot of different species. This year, just before I left, I had a western wood pewee up there, which shouldn't be there. But hard to say, you know, it's hard to say at this point for me that it's changing.
Yeah, and so in terms of changing then, just firsthand observation, what have you seen in terms of climate change yourself?
Clearly the ice is getting thinner. Clearly the active zone, which is the thaw zone. So you have the tundra, and then you have a zone here that thaws every year, and then you have the permafrost underneath it. And definitely the thaw zone is definitely increasing. And then there's other people up there that are studying ice, and they're seeing where the ice is definitely thinner. It melts off earlier, and it forms later, and it moves off shore further, so you can look at some of the satellite images of the extent of the ice pack. So you're definitely seeing that. People who look at shoreline erosion stuff, you're definitely seeing evidence of the erosion due to, you know, water and climate change and all that. and the people who study vegetation up there. There's a lot of really neat research going on up there. I've definitely seen changes in vegetation where willows in particular seem to be creeping north and growing a little bit bushier and taller. And there's a lot of experiments going on there. So it's going on, and now you look at the shipping industry, they totally believe it. They're looking for the Northwest Passage. The U.S. military, among other militaries in the Arctic, are looking now at establishing deep water ports up there to protect their borders from neighboring countries. So it's, the evidence is there, and it's totally being believed by, by big business in particular, and our military, as well as the researchers.
Okay. Do snowy pairs bond for life like the greys, or are they more like long-eared owls and willing to switch partners each year?
Yeah, my best guess based on all the years is yes, that they switch partners every year, but we just can't capture all of them every year in order to quantify that like we can with long-eared owls. With long-eared owls, we catch every male and every female that are breeding, and then the next year we go back in the same areas and catch all the birds again, and we can tell you that they're not coming back and they're not mating with the same mate in previous years. With the snowy and the shortage, we can tell you that up to some degree. With the snowies, I suspect the same thing. Open country nomadic species that probably switch mates every year. If there's a sex that's going to show fidelity to a site in line with other open country species like long-eared and short-eared, then males tend to come back to the areas, and females tend to be the dispersers. So we see some male snowy owls that are banded. We don't know who they are because we can't recapture them. It's really tough. And so we think that those males, some males come back to the area but breed with different females each year. It's just hard to get the data to say that it's 100% factual for the snowies. But if they're anything like the long-ears or short-ears where we have a lot of data where we can say that, that's probably the case, that they probably switch from year to year. But what's interesting is that we do see banded birds coming back. So other data and satellite telemetry data would lead you to believe that snowy owls wander the Arctic and really never come back to the same area. Barrow might be a little different in that respect because we do see banded birds coming back to the area. And we do see occasional females, but who are they? Are they adult females coming back over time, or are they birds returning to their natal area? Just mark recapture is going to help us resolve that, but it's just going to take more and more time to do that. But yeah, it's probably similar to other open country species of owls.
So you mentioned that we can capture all the long-eared owl pairs in an area, but not the snowy. So what is the difference there? And why can't you capture the snowy?
Because they're hard to capture. The long-ears, at least, they're in vegetation where we can hide our nets, and they don't see the nets, and we're able to flush them down through the vegetation. Short-ears, we can catch some of them and not others, but snowies, they're just open tundra, it's flat. Any kind of trapping device that we set up, they're just so wily, and they see them, and they're really hard to capture. And so I'm hoping next year that we bring a team there's a bunch of old guys that capture snowy owls for a living. Norman Smith in Massachusetts comes to mind. And we're going to try to bring some of these owl trappers, a couple guys in Canada that are very good at it as well, and bring them up there and get a team that they just trap snowy owls to find out and maybe answer some of those questions. Fidelity to mates, fidelity to sites. We can do some of it genetically as well, and we've collected enough feathers that we might be able to, unravel some of those, answers to those questions as well.
Okay. Are nesting sites distributed evenly across the area you are studying, or do they appear grouped together?
Yeah, in a big year, they appear to be somewhat evenly distributed, separated, let's just say, by a mile or more. And so that seems to be so. But in low years, it's really hard to assess that, because there's so few within the 100 square mile study area. But what's interesting is that, and this here's a good example of it, there's a lot, the only nests that made it this year were along the road, and were along areas where there's snow fences. And we think maybe something's going on along the road that makes it conducive to being successful. Now, is there more accumulation of snow because of snow fences, and there's more lemmings, and they're safer under there, and it melts off slower, and they're available? Is a climate just more conducive to lemmings and consequently the owls as well? But we're starting to see something like that. We're going to try to analyze that. Do snowy owls that nest near the road do better than snowy owls that do not? The other side, however, is that snowy owls that nest near the road are disturbed more often. And with the popularity of snowy owls and the increase in research up there, wildlife photographers are definitely having an impact on snowy owls. They're supposed to get permits and do this. There's a bunch of rules, but this was the worst we've ever seen, the harassment of snowy owls at their nest sites by wildlife photographers. And we're trying to get, kind of get that in order and do it in a way where, we're not really offending people, but nonetheless, wildlife photographers are bad. And then other researchers. There's so many research projects going on, and they're all roadside based. And so it's kind of biased in that sense. And with so many researchers walking around the tundra and the behavior of snowy owls to flush from their nest at several hundred meters, they're having an effect as well. And that's a whole other can of worms now affecting, talking to other researchers about you can't be near snowy owl nests. And so we're going to try to deal with that, but that's a mess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the roads, in one hand, do well, and in another hand, don't do well.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to know with the photographers and the researchers that it just takes a couple bad apples to spoil it. And some are great.
I mean, that's all it does. And you can tell if you go on the internet and you see people who have photographs of snowy owls, if they're flying around and looking at the camera, they're probably harassing a nest. Unless they're working with us, and then they have permission to harass the nest. And that's the same with researchers, and I've approached some of the researchers, and we all have concerns, but from their perspective, why should that affect our study? And, they have a strong point there, but we've got to do something on both ends of that.
Okay, so what do we know about the snowy owl population, and how reliable are those numbers?
I don't think the numbers are reliable at all. When I wrote the BNA account for the snowy owls, some of the estimates were like 300,000, 300,000 worldwide. How people came up with that, no one knows. It's extrapolations when it comes down to. And you have this much land, you have this many snowy owls, this much land, therefore there must be this many snowy owls given this area of land. It doesn't really work that way. And then in recent years, the number has gone from 300,000, now the snowy owl has some status with the IUCN, I think it is, and it's gone from that to 30,000. So someone came up with this theory on these snowy owls nesting groups and boids, and multiply this out by there's only so many boids in the country or in the world, and there's only so many owls per area, and therefore there's right around 30,000 snowy owls. The idea has merit, it's still guessing. So we don't know. And then there's been some genetic studies to try to extrapolate populations with that indicate that maybe there's 14,000 females out there based on genetic population analysis. But there's recent genetic evidence to indicate that using the methodologies that they use to extrapolate the populations has problems, especially through the course of evolution. So the bottom line is no one knows. And until we devise a method to actually survey the Arctic instead of just guessing, we're never going to know. But maybe the best way to do it is to find them during the winter. Of course, we won't be able to know how many snowy owls spend the winter in the Arctic, but these big concentrations in the wintertime, like at the Great Lakes and Northeast United States, may give us some insight into numbers and/or sex ratio and age. But right now, it's just a big guess. And so all these numbers that come out are a guess, even though I think we should go out and try to survey and figure this out, but right now we're guessing.
But what about the numbers in your study area?
My study area, and I can only speak to the area that I work in, they're clearly declining. There's significant declines of both snowy owls and lemmings in our study area. And if you look at the trend line, which maybe we'll put it on, I've given it a couple of papers recent years, but maybe we'll put it online or something like that.
It's on our website too.
Oh, it is on our website, and you can see there's a clear downward trend for both. But does that mean that the snowy owl population in Alaska, for example, is declining? Maybe they just up and move somewhere else where the habitat is better, where lemmings are more abundant, and their numbers haven't declined overall, but clearly in barrel, they have declined. Again, hard to say, and I can only speak for Barrow. And I know it's, we really want to be able to address these questions, but we've got to do it, we've got to put the really, really big effort into it, and that's devise a survey method where we're able to simultaneously survey the Arctic from vast regions. And I've been talking to people about, can we do it with satellites? The satellite technology is pretty good now. We would be able to somehow look at satellites and look at these geographic areas and see if there's nesting snowy owls. So that's one of the things we're looking at. Or do we set up transects and run drones through these transects and take photographs and stuff like that. But we have to do something more than just guess.
Okay. Another question, did most of the snowy owls that erupted to Ohio and other parts of the South last winter return to the north this spring?
Yeah, most of them, I don't know. I know people have put satellite transmitters on some, and clearly, some have gone back to the north. I mean, and there's good information on that, and even their travel routes, and that actually is kind of cool stuff. But you don't know what they did when they get there. So I would say we have to take the satellite stuff to the next level. Right now, it's cool stuff, totally cool stuff. But it's got to go beyond, gee whiz. Now we have to follow these owls that go back to their breeding grounds. And instead of saying, oh, they must be breeding because their locations are centered here during this time period that they would have to breed. And it's probably true, but we have to ground truth it and know for sure. We can't just make inferences all the time. And then if we go there, then we might find that, oh, there's not just one nest, there's 50 nests, or there's 100 nests, and this is where they are this year. So now we have to take the satellite stuff to the next level, and that level is to go out and ground truth and see where they are. Now that's not an easy undertaking. The vast areas of the Canadian Arctic, if you've got one of your birds that was banded in Massachusetts by Norman Smith and the satellite transmitter put on it, for example, and it goes up to Baffin Island, Canada, we got to go there and check it out instead of just making inferences. It's really opened up more questions, like it does, and so as we progress scientifically, we have to take these next steps to answer these questions.
Okay. We touched on this a little bit before with the Arctic foxes, but are there wolves and bears where they nest?
In many areas where they nest, not in the Barrow region.
Okay.
We have polar bears that might occasionally, stumble upon a nest along a coastal area, for example, and I have seen polar bears come near snowy owl nests and snowy owls going to defend. But for the most part, a polar bear is probably not a big threat.
Okay.
But certainly in other areas where you have maybe grizzly bears from time to time in some of these areas, but I think most of the snowies are coastal. But you could have wolverines, you could have wolves. So they're probably a threat, but not to wipe out, a whole nesting aggregation or colony of snowy owls. But probably from time to time that occurs.
Okay. So this is a question that says, why even touch and disturb the nest and the parents at all?
Yeah, good question. Your option is to do nothing. And in doing nothing, which is great, and I don't believe in every bird should have a transmitter on, every bird should be banded and color banded. I don't believe in that. But in order to do things to manage and conserve and provide biological information, you do have to conduct research, and you do have to go out there. And we do try to minimize it, but you have to handle birds, you have to disturb birds, and we do disturb them. We've looked at their stress levels, their corticosteroid levels in relation to working on them. They are stressed out when we work on them, but they don't abandon the nests, and everything seems to be fine once you leave. It's just a stressful event when you're doing it. But the only way we're going to get some of this information is by banding these birds, marking these birds. Are they returned to the same areas as some of the other questions? We wouldn't know it if we didn't put bands on them or satellite transmitters on them. Is there fidelity to mates? We wouldn't know this information. How do they grow? What are the sex ratios? What is the age structure? Where are they going next when they're not here? And so we do disturb them, and we try to set the system up. When I first started, I was following the protocol of the earlier researchers. We went to nests every day. We thought, God, this is a lot of harassment, And so now we've set up our system, and we experimented with, different time intervals. We felt that 3 days was good, 5 days wasn't because you lose information. So we've settled on visiting nests every 3 days, going in there, doing our research as fast as possible, and getting out. So we disturb them, but we think the disturbance is worth the information. Now, sometimes things happen, you know, and there's been times when our research, not only just snowy owls, but other species, has caused mortality, and we have to be honest with that. It's very, very rare, but things do happen, and so you have to balance it out and to gather information. So I'm probably more cautious than most on that, particularly because we're working on the breeding grounds. But I understand your concern. Why not just leave them alone? And it would be great if they don't need us. And if it was just the vast Arctic and nothing was going on, and they lived and they bred and they did all this stuff, because they don't need us at all. But in order to find out how the populations are, we do need to do some research.
Yeah. What are the chances of getting a snowy owl cam back? We had one how many years ago?
Yeah, I would love to get a snowy owl cam back. This was the perfect year to do it. That nest of 7 would have been outstanding. They were such great providers, and it was just a great nest. But it's hard to do. It's hard to coordinate and you know, explore. You'd have to talk to Jonathan about this. You know, I know he was trying to make it happen, but then you have to coordinate, you know, the people who know how to set cameras up, to do this and that. So you have time problems, and then you have a very short window, and to get people up to do it, to set it up right, to get the feed so you can see it.
To have electricity and internet.
It's very difficult, but it would be spectacular. It'd be probably one of the most popular owl cams in the world. And we're hoping next year that maybe if we get ahead of the ball and we can plan it so we can get a team up there to set it up. Because this year we probably could have had a live camera on that nest for 6 weeks, because 7 chicks are in that nest, and they leave at 3 weeks of age, and so they just kept, these would have left, these are still growing, these were left, these are still growing. It would have been spectacular this year.
And we could have ended up with a live cam on one of the nests that didn't succeed too, is the reality.
Yeah, and so
And then that would
taking
be,
a chance.
yeah.
But given our expertise, we probably could have found it, you know, picked a good one and got it done fair. Yeah, anyway, so.
Hopefully it'll happen.
Yeah, text Jonathan.
Okay, so another snowy owl question. What makes snowy owls like and tolerate these super cold, icy conditions?
Like and tolerate. I don't know if they like it, but they've evolved to be there.
Right.
You know, I don't see them smiling. I'm in the snow and all that. Just, you know, the course of evolution, you know. I mean, first of all, the base white color, you know, is probably to conceal themselves in a base white Arctic environment. And even on their wintering grounds, most of it is, you know, during a snow-covered environment or patchy snow-covered environment. They certainly can tolerate it. There's been some research, it's older research, I think in the 70s, where they, going back to harassment, where they've taken snowy owls, they've put them in laboratory situations, and they've increased temperature and wind speed, look at respiration and things of that sort. And they find that the snowy owls seem to be quite comfortable at temperatures that may push minus 40 below zero, 50 below zero. Then when they increase wind speed, then they start to shut down some of their activities and stuff like that. So they seem to be quite comfortable in almost all Arctic circumstances. Although, you know, over time, it might be harder to find food. So once you don't have food, then you might succumb to that. But they seem to be quite comfortable in almost anything. And even the chicks, in the summertime, Barrow is relatively cold, although it's warming. But at 35 degrees, wind blowing 10, 15 miles an hour, and we're in long johns and coats and all that, and the owls are ghoul fluttering, you know, vibrating the high end apparatus of their throat muscles. They're overheating just like a dog would be panting, and they're trying to cool down. So they're very, very well adapted to that environment.
Okay. Let's see here. There were many sightings of snowies in New Jersey. Is it a rare occurrence for them to be that far south?
In New Jersey, a rare occurrence. Nah, you know, I would say no. Generally, during these eruptions, or, you know, whatever an eruption is, which needs to be defined, it's usually the same areas. You know, most of the time, it's the Great Lakes region, it's the northeastern United States, etc. And so, coming down during, you know, a migration, first of all, it's a migration. But coming down during that stuff and, you know, dropping into Massachusetts and New Jersey, New York, New Jersey, etc., that doesn't, yeah, it doesn't excite me. I mean, as far as being exceptional, it occurs. And so, you know, I don't think, you know, during a big year like that, and most of the birds are young in the year, so they just came off a good breeding season. And so, and they, you know, they're probably programmed to migrate, so probably an innate behavior, but they don't know where they're going because it's their first migration. So they may overshoot, but it doesn't, it doesn't surprise me to see in New Jersey. Now, what surprises you is one shows up in Florida, Texas, Northern California. That's surprising. But if you think of birds in general, that happens in many groups of birds. They migrate south and they just keep going, or they wander for who knows what reasons, and they get far outside their normal wintering range. But their normal wintering range is, the northern tier of the United States. It doesn't happen as often in northwestern United States, Washington, Idaho, Montana, but over in the northeast, when there's a big eruption migration, is what we like to call it, it tends to be the Great Lakes region sweeping over to the east coast and then south into, Ohio, for example.
Okay. Well,
Ohio's always in my life.
yeah, it is. So furthest south, you've heard of a snowy owl?
Further south, yeah. This year I think Norman Smith told me that they stayed in Massachusetts. Like there's still some snowy owls around. Someone just texted me a week ago, said there was one in somewhere in Wisconsin or Michigan.
But they'll get down to Florida occasionally or Texas.
Very rarely.
Yeah.
And then there's one that showed up in Bermuda 2 years ago. Then the one that showed up in Hawaii, it must have landed on a ship and got there. And so that was an aberration for sure. But as far as the northern tier of the United States, from Washington all the way across the Great Lakes to Massachusetts, and then a little below that, that's normal.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we've covered most of the snowy owl questions, and I do want to leave some time for osprey nest.
We have more questions? Okay.
And great gray nest. So osprey, though. So we talked about this earlier in the season before they had. Well, it was early in the season, and Charlie the male was up on the perch, and the great horned owl that was nested nearby was whacking him at night, and it happened, I think, almost three consecutive nights in a row. And so now that nest, which has been a thriving nest all season, has 3 fledglings, and 1 or 2 of them are on the perch in the night. And so a great horned owl the other night came and whacked the fledgling and knocked it off the perch, and it went down. It came back to the nest and was fine, and they're all accounted for. But so a question is, I'm wondering if the great horned owl knocking the fledglings off the perch is just a territorial behavior.
Yeah, hard to say. It's hard to say. Territory sounds reasonable. Enemies just sounds reasonable.
So who do we think maybe the attacker is?
Great horned owl.
But which great, do we think
I don't know if it's the male or the female.
Right. Could it be one of the great horned owl, the juveniles from this year?
My guess is no, but I
Okay.
don't know for sure. My guess would be that they're not programmed to do that yet, to defend. There's been one chick, I don't know how many of the great horned chicks, I've heard one almost every night. And it's moved around and to the other side of the osprey nest in those trees there too. So maybe one of the young chicks is just on the other side of the osprey nest, and the adult is coming in and whacking the young osprey because it's maybe, thinking about its chick. It's hard to say, it's all speculation.
It could be the same great horned owl that was whacking Charlie.
It definitely could be.
Yeah.
And I think we thought that was the male because the female was on the nest. And so it may have been the male.
She was on the nest.
And so, but cool, the osprey, he sucked it up, Charlie sucked it up, figured out how to live with it and raised 3 chicks. And these chicks are big. I don't think that the great horns are going to prey on these chicks. I just think they're going to whack them because they're osprey and the others are owls.
Yeah, and the chicks are big. Okay, so then you kind of answered the question, are the fledged owlets still around? So you said you're hearing 1, but only 1.
I'm only hearing 1 at a time. And, earlier in the season you could hear a couple, screaming for food. They're still food begging. They'll food beg as for as long as they can. As long as they can bum food from their parents, they're going to do it. You guys might understand that out there. And so, but I'm only hearing 1 since I've only been back 3 weeks now from the Arctic. So, but I am only hearing 1 at night. But the others might be around, or maybe they're elsewhere. I don't know. Hopefully they survived. And the camera watchers might have more information than I on that one.
Okay. So someone put in a question slash suggestion about an arch, and they said a St. Louis type arch that could go over the nest to
Maybe the
maybe
gateway to the west, Orange?
decrease the flyby harassment from
Uh-huh.
the great horned owls. And then they talked about the mannequin that it seems successfully went in at the Hog Island, and with the different clothes and the lighting.
Well, different clothes,
And-
yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, just kind of, do you think that the X's would be effective, and is that something you would consider doing?
Yeah, the mannequin sounds interesting. We're not gonna do it, but it does sound pretty interesting. I don't know.
Well, we might do it if there were, if we had, I mean, if the great horned owl attacks were taking chicks, we might do it.
I don't know. I mean, well,
We might do
we didn't put the platform up first, all right? But I'm more of, you let nature take its course, and, things like that happen. And maybe next year the great horns won't even nest near the osprey nest. This year they did. No, it's really neat, and I know we all want to help, and like the snowy owls, and when you know a chick's going to die, you want to help, but it's not what we do. We're there to monitor their lives, try to figure out why they die or get killed, and whatever else goes on. And it does break your heart, but you kind of let things be. And I'm more of the type, it would just, it would bother me if the great horned owl, like the one that took the great gray chick, that bothered the heck out of me. And that's how it works. And so it would be unlikely we would do anything, but Liberty is really pushing me to that. But I'm not going to put a mannequin up there, I can tell you that. But I like the idea. And then change his clothes every day. I don't know if I have enough energy for that.
Okay.
And do you do male, female? Does one work better than the other? Or do we have to explore those things?
Okay. All right. So
Sorry.
we've got kind of a variety of questions left.
Okay.
So here's one. What if someone finds an abandoned baby owl? Should you keep it and raise it, or just leave it alone?
Most likely you would leave it alone, or you might put it in a tree. If it's a great horned owl and it's on the ground, that's just part of their behavior. They jump from the nest, they jump from branch to branch, they fall to the ground, they climb back up. And so you would put it up in a tree. If it was a short-haired owl that nests on the grassland, you probably don't want to put it in a tree. Most of the time you just leave them alone. Their parents are usually nearby. Now if it's injured, it's another story. It has a broken wing, a broken leg, clearly starving to death, something like that. If you want to help, again, I like to leave things alone, but I understand helping. If it gets hit by a car, I'll pick it up and help it. But for the most part, I think you leave them alone if they look healthy.
Do foxes see as well as owls?
Do foxes see as well? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. They're somewhat nocturnal as well, like many of the owls, and I'm sure the fox researchers know that, but I don't.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So someone says, curious as to how many times a season osprey will raise young.
Oh gosh, you want to talk to an osprey researcher? My guess is you probably only have one chance. If you you have a really prolonged incubation period, you have a very prolonged nesting period. You probably only have one chance. You might lay a replacement clutch, and I'm just guessing here. If you lost your clutch very early on, maybe you would continue to lay. But once chicks hatch, you probably have one chance. You'd have to. My friend Rob Dominich out of Missoula, he would be a good person to ask on that. Or actually the osprey can people, they probably know all these things.
Do owl chicks have a pecking order or commit siblicide?
Yeah, that's been a long-standing assumption. What I can tell you, what I've seen in snowy owls is, I can't say there's a pecking order, but I can say that, the larger chicks often outcompete the younger chicks if food is scarce. But to see outright aggression, we've never seen it. And we've never seen females really favor any. And this is based on blind observations and some of the camera work. The females seem to apportion prey relatively evenly. When males deliver prey to the chicks that are out of the nest, this prey delivery goes to this chick, and then the male catches something else. You watch, he flies over here and he drops off to another chick. And so you tend to see that. And I don't see the outright aggression that you might like associate or relate to the Cain and Abel of eagles, where the larger eagle beats up on the smaller eagle and kills it and takes all the food. Or, as we saw, it was last year, the year before, the osprey nest, the larger one beat it up on the smaller one. The owls are just much more advanced than that, and so we tend not to see that.
Okay, and this is the last question. Can you tell me a little bit about northern saw-whet owls? I believe I had one out on a trail cam at night.
Okay, they sound like a truck backing up, a big piece of heavy equipment, you know that. So if you have that going on all night long, that's a good indication you have a saw-whet owl nearby. You saw it on a trail cam, depends what time of year, they can be highly migratory, maybe nomadic, I'm not so sure about that, the data's maybe not quite there for that. Nonetheless, the big migrations of saw-whet owls, they nest in cavities, usually woodpecker holes we'll find them. Occasionally they'll nest in natural cavities of trees, and of course there's the whole nest box thing that people put up boxes to attract them. So depending on the time of year, they can be relatively common one year and then uncommon the next year. Again, might indicate that they're nomadic or highly migratory. I don't know what else you might want to know about them. Cute little owl. I mean, I don't use the word cute, but it fits saw-whet owl. Yeah, neat little owl. We work on them. We have nest boxes and we also have natural sites. So I believe we found more natural nest sites than anybody probably in the world. And we're looking at assessing the characteristics from a wildlife management standpoint to retain natural snags in the forest for saw-whet owls and boreal owls. But that's it. I guess it would be a more specific question. In our study areas, we find nests pretty much every year. Every once in a while we don't. So, but a handsome little owl.
Yeah. All right. I think that's it. We got through.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and we are broadcasting again as usual from the Nine Pipes Lodge.
Yes.
And they've allowed us to come over here because it's so difficult to get what we need to broadcast this over at our research station, and so we're in the lounge surrounded by a lot of stuffed animals. Kind of cool. So thank you very much, and we'll look forward to another chat sometime. And the hat party's coming up too. If you want to fly in September 8th. You can join us, and then of course we always need your support. So thanks as always.
Okay. Bye.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead.